friends. Welcome to episode 305 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 18th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can find me on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast or on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at LMS_United. On Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United and on the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. It is now my pleasure to introduce LearnX, which is our newest podcast sponsor. If you are overwhelmed with managing student research projects and wish that there were a better way to guide students towards credible sources and ethical research practices, then you need to try LearnX. LearnX automatically documents your students' research journeys, capturing their searches, website visits, and notes. LearnX then organizes the students' notes, creates perfectly formatted bibliographies, and even generates a snapshot report that reveals key insights into how the student conducts research. With LearnX, you can provide personalized feedback, identify research challenges, and teach information literacy skills more effectively. Visit LearnX.com to learn more and schedule a demo. If you mention that you heard about LearnX on School Librarians United, you will receive 20% off your subscription. Today's episode, friends, is pretty unique for several reasons, not the least of which this episode is being released on a Monday. This is because, unlike most content, which isn't time-sensitive, today's conversation is. Today, we have the opportunity to meet one of the three candidates who is running for ALA president for the year 2026 to 2027. And what makes this candidate so unique is that she has worked as a school librarian. And I am so excited about the prospect of having a president of ALA who knows exactly what it is like to do the job we do every day. It is for that precise reason that we are sharing this conversation today. And I would like to encourage any and all who are listening and are currently members of ALA to consider voting in this next election. Ballots will be mailed out to all ALA members as of January 31st, 2025, and voting will take place between March 10th and April 2nd. Everyone is invited to view and show your support for today's guest using the Padlet link in today's show notes. And now for today's episode, ALA candidate for president, and my conversation with Dr. Andrea Jamison. Friends, I am so excited. Dr. Jamison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to have this moment to speak with you.
Well, and friends, Dr. Jamison and I have crossed professional paths several times, and this is going back several years ago. You had asked if school librarians would be interested in talking to your students, and it was during the summertime, and you were teaching a class, and I remember getting to talk to your students during the summer, and it was a class that you were teaching.
Yes, that was for the management of school libraries class that I teach. And I have to absolutely let you know that students really enjoyed the conversation. They enjoy the playlist from the podcast. And so I use it quite often. So again, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing for school libraries.
Well, thank you for also the opportunity I had to speak at ALA Annual is only because of you. You were given the opportunity to generate a panel to speak in Chicago, and that was in 2023. And I was there as an invited guest. It was lovely. It made my day. I've never spoken at ALA, and that was my opportunity. So I really appreciate it. But, Dr. Jamison, before we get into too much, do tell us about what you do for a living, because I think this is going to resonate with our listening audience.
All right, absolutely. So for those that do not know me and haven't had a chance to meet me personally, I hope I do have a chance to meet you. I am Andrea Jamison. I work at Illinois State University. I am an assistant professor of school librarianship. I work with both pre-service teachers as well as pre-service librarians. I also teach courses at Dominican University where I work with students who are working on their master's in librarianship because they are either embarking on careers as either public or academic librarians. Before working at Illinois State University, I was a school librarian. I was a school librarian for over 9 years. I then transitioned to a public library. I worked in the children's department. And then I also moved into academic libraries. I think that's so important for me to share in this conversation. And as I talk about my bid for ALA president, because I understand librarians. I understand the work that librarians do. I understand it from a practical as well as a theoretical perspective. And so that is why I'm here. That's why I'm running for president, so that I can become an advocate for all library workers.
Well, and I will say, as somebody who has connected with a lot of school librarians, the idea that someone in leadership could relate to what we do genuinely, because authentic, real hands-on experience working in a school library, there is the kind of demands that we are responding to on an hourly basis, and the way that we library, I think is somewhat unique. And while there is a lot of crossover, I think having somebody in leadership who can say, absolutely, I can totally relate. I've worked in school libraries, really would help me get myself to the ballot box, because I want to feel good about the person who represents me, because they truly have, experienced what it's like to be a school librarian.
Absolutely. And the role of the school librarian is an essential role. And I think that is left out of a lot of mainstream library conversations. And the reason why I say that is because there's so much research out there about the impact that school librarians have within a learning environment. And I'm thinking just, the study that was conducted by OWL, which is the Association of Illinois School Library Educators, that talks about powerful libraries make powerful learners. School librarians are also essential because they're the first ones, especially in communities that are economically deprived. They're going to be the first point of contact for a lot of students in terms of learning those foundational information literacy skills and developing that love of reading, right? And we talk in libraries often that we want our students, our patrons, right? We're preparing them for their future selves. We want them to be lifelong learners. So they need those foundational skills that they're going to get from a school librarian. And those are the skills that are going to be transferable to different types of library settings. So we can't bypass the school libraries. Oftentimes, we find that that happens a lot. And that's one of the things that I want to change. I want to bring school libraries back to the forefront because there's so much happening in society right now that's impacting the work that we do, especially as it relates to job loss and bearing the brunt of censorship challenges. And we need to change that. And so I'm running for ALA president because I am standing in solidarity with school librarians, not only as a former school librarian myself, but also as an academic professor who understands the importance of school libraries in the greater conversation of libraries and information literacy and digital literacy, as well as in impacting change to our educational society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you, what are your presidential priority areas if you were to be elected?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So, um, first and foremost, as I mentioned, standing in solidarity with school librarians, the reason why that is a huge issue for me or a priority area is because of our current socio and political climate right now, where and it's changing right with current legislation, but there is this sort of pro-censorship sentiment that's happening across the country. And there's also movements towards anti-DEI. So just the mention of equity, diversity, and inclusion is seen as being very divisive. And so because of the current climate, there has been a lot of backlash that has been prevalent um, within libraries. And I feel that school librarians are really taking the brunt of that backlash. And we're the ones that have been experiencing job loss, right, at the school level. We're the ones that have been facing angry parents. And oftentimes, especially if you look at what has happened to Amanda Jones, that librarian, that school librarians are facing harassment. And so I wanted to sort of give that little context because a priority area for me, a significant priority area for me is pro-library legislation as well as library protection. I think that is very important because as librarians, school librarians, as we are doing our work, which is very important work, we have to make sure that we are protected as we are um, making sure that we are aligning our core values with our professional responsibilities. We have to make sure that we are not being subjected to violence and to harassment for doing our job. And we need to make sure that we have a support system behind us so that it's not just a matter of someone making an accusation that is completely false, right, about librarians um, disseminating obscene information or materials to children, and then without any conversation, that person has automatically lost their job or they're called on the carpet and they're used as a scapegoat. So I am really pushing for, again, just legislation that is pro-library and that would really support protection for librarians, all librarians. And then second, there's this misinformation that's out there. And I've touched on this a little bit, but it's that misinformation about libraries and librarians indoctrinating, right, communities, particularly children. And so we have to counter that, which is why my platform is, we have to change the narrative. It's from information to inspiration. We have to do what we can to combat misinformation. We don't often get a chance because of this conversation that has been led by a lot of grassroots organizations that are pro-censorship, a lot of this conversation that has sort of shifted the focus about libraries to damaging the age of innocence or passing or disseminating obscene materials that we're trying to indoctrinate youth. That conversation has overshadowed the work of information literacy. So we need to do what we can to aggressively change that narrative. And then another priority I have, obviously, is the fact that there's a lack of support for school librarians. That is a big issue. And so one of the things that I want to do is have conversations with ALA Council and other ALA divisions and chapters, as well as the roundtables, about the need to really rally around school librarians in terms of making sure that we are reaching out to administrators so that they will understand the work that we do and that we could have that support at an administrative level. And there's many different ways, many different ideas that I have for that. But again, just to reiterate, definitely the legislation, definitely support for school librarians, and also making sure that we're countering this misinformation. We can get into the library budget if you want to. That's a whole nother elephant that we need to chew, but there needs to be more transparency there as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So let me ask you, you mentioned this increase in pro-library legislation. How do you plan to accomplish this given our current socio-political climate? And I'm thinking about we're in the absolute infancy of this next administration. And in one day, the number of executive orders that have come down feel truly like an assault on a great deal that so many of us have come to perhaps even take for granted under our last administration. I don't think we can rest. I think we are now realizing the fight has just begun.
Absolutely. And so I've begun that work. Fortunately, we have a lot of stakeholders that what happens in libraries, especially what happens in school libraries, happens to so many other groups as well. And let me specify, publishers, right? They're impacted by what happens in school libraries because with the decline in brick and mortar bookstores, a lot of publishers, a lot of authors depend on the school libraries to get their work in front of children. So if school libraries are closing, that means that a lot of publishers don't have that avenue or that outlet to disseminate the work of authors, particularly authors of color, diverse authors as well, authors from the LGBTQIA plus community, and so many different groups that have rich cultural experiences that really need to share their stories. So I've begun work with a lot of different organizations. What we have been doing is we have been trying to draft language. And I'm from Illinois, so let me say that. Let me step back and say I'm from Illinois. Illinois is one of the first states to pass anti-censorship legislation with House Bill 2789. And I was one of the librarians. Many librarians have done this great work, have championed this great work. But I was one of the librarians to actually be vocal about this, talking to legislators. So what we are doing right now, we are trying to draft language that can be used in various states to propose legislation for pro-library legislation. Something else that we want to propose, and we're still having conversations about this, is that you have, we have this space where we're doing our jobs and we're doing a really great job at what it is that we're doing. But again, we have this backlash where people feel emboldened to physically threat librarians and school librarians for the work that we are doing. So we're also trying to draft language that says, similar to what you see for parking meter workers or for federal mail carriers, that says that if you attack a mail carrier, that you can receive a fine of up to $1,000 or you can receive 6 months in prison. And we know that this is a challenge, but we're going to do everything that we can to draft the language and to put it out there, because it's not that it's a challenge as much as it is that if we become silent and if we don't try, then the people that is pushing this legislation out there might think that we don't need it and we might not be heard. So we're definitely trying to push, we're trying to draft that language. And then lastly, what we're doing is we're trying to document. We are right now trying to work with researchers, academic researchers who can document the harm of censorship, the harm of this political climate on the field of librarianship, specifically school librarians, so that we can have the data that we need, that when we're talking to legislators, we can say, this is why this is important. This is why you need to pass this law. This is what is happening. And we've been making some great connections, especially as it relates to education and educational goals. You harm school librarians, you're ultimately harming the goals that we have to make students better readers. So yeah.
Well, and Dr. Jamison, I'm thinking, since 2020, there have been protections put in place for poll workers because during the days immediately following the election in 2020, there were some incidents of aggressive behavior and threats made against poll workers, and such that many poll workers ended up leaving their profession because of the danger that they felt doing their jobs. And I, for one, am not. I'm well aware of colleagues who have made changes in where they work, and and oftentimes because they've been removed from their libraries, they've had to change their employment status. and left school libraries altogether because of the threats that were being made against them. So I know that it is possible to put this type of protections in place because of other professions and people who have been threatened doing their jobs.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we're trying to document, right? What is the economic impact of this, right? Because if you have communities that are being devastated because they're losing good educators, good library educators, that is going to be problematic. And that is going to adversely impact communities economically, but it's also going to adversely, as I mentioned before, impact our educational goals, right? And making sure that we are raising, that we are being great stewards of our next generation of leaders. And we need them to be critical thinkers. We need them to be able to be literate or savvy as it relates to media and using information in appropriate ways. So yeah, absolutely. Lots of librarians are leaving the field because of the climate. And so this is why this legislation is important. And this is why, again, I'm working with publishers, I'm working with educators and other librarians, as well as we have a few lawyers who are on board, who have said, yeah, we will look over the language, right? So that when we do create what we're trying to do, a toolkit, and disseminate it to librarians, and then provide the workshops and the training to say, this is what has worked in this state, that when it's rolled out, librarians will feel comfortable having these conversations, and they will have the language that is written for them so that they can be empowered to advocate for this type of legislation.
Dr. Jamison, your students are so fortunate to have you because you are already very savvy about the current climate and what it's like to be graduating and moving into the school libraries. I only can imagine, when I graduated as an aspiring school librarian back in 2007, the climate was very different, and truly, we've all had to learn as we make our way through this sort of strange and bizarre time. But I'm grateful that you are at least training the next generation of librarians to graduate from the field, that they have a sense of what they are able to do. And I'm sure that you, in equipping them with the tools they need to defend their jobs, are going to be ready for the workforce. What about the ALA budget? How do you plan to address concerns about the ALA budget? Because I know that that's something that is definitely going to fall in your lap when you win this election.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. So, yeah, I definitely think that the issue that we have is that we have a revenue issue. ALA has to be a little bit more creative in driving revenues. And that means that we have to do what we can to recruit more librarians back into the field. And we also have to recruit, as I mentioned before, administrators, which is, again, why tapping into and protecting and supporting school librarians become it's so important. It's so needed. And so one of the things that I propose to ALA, and that I want to have this conversation with ALA Council, is that, again, first and foremost, when I'm working with students, one of the things I find out is that students have a little bit of trepidation, like, have I made the right decision to go into this field given the current climate? Am I going to have a job? Will I be placed at a school where the administrator doesn't get it? So I may find myself the only person in the building that really understands this mission, but without any type of support. So I feel like one of the things that we have to do to bring up that membership is, one, support school librarians, right? Only about 30% of school librarians worldwide are members of ALA. And I think we can turn that around if we have more support for school librarians, which means we're going to need the ACRL, right, which is the Association of College and Research Libraries, to really help and assist with making sure that they're putting out that research and leading conversations with administrators about the importance of school libraries and the work that school librarians are doing. I think it's one of those things where research librarians need school librarians and school librarians need research librarians. The reason being is because research librarians, they need the school librarians to really inform, right, their research because they write about the practice. And then school librarians, they need that research to further inform their practice. So it's that great symbiotic relationship. So I definitely think that if we can partner with various divisions in ALA, as I mentioned before, ACRL as well as AASL, right? The Association of American School Librarians. All of the organizations that work with children's literature and children's book, YALSA, that's very important because we have that vested interest. If we can pull together and can support school librarians, that I think that might make school librarians a little bit more interested in being vested into the American Library Association. So that will increase revenue. Secondly, we can't leave them as the sole person within their districts to fight this cause. We need to have conversations with administrators. I constantly hear my students say to me, Dr. J, I just don't know how to talk to my administrator. And it's understandable because oftentimes they're new, right? I've been in this field for a while. You've been in this field for a while. We have the language, we have the experience. So we need to make sure that we are becoming that bridge that they need to talk to administrators. So by opening up our membership to administrators, we can tap into a different revenue stream. And I think we got to do more than just invite them into ALA. Again, as I mentioned before, we got to have those dedicated workshops, those sessions that will let administrators know why intellectual freedom is important. We need to let them know that, yeah, you can't just take that book off the shelf because then you are violating the First Amendment rights of your students because minor students absolutely have First Amendment rights. And we have to let them know that, yeah, we understand that this parent is upset, but this parent does not have the right to censor a book for every parent in that school district. And so sometimes they don't get it. So ALA needs to lead those conversations. And I think that is going to address some of the budget issues in terms of revenues. And then lastly, I think what's important is transparency, right? We're part of an organization that is membership driven, and we need to be more transparent about the budget and how we are spending funding. And that's one of the things that I would like to do and just keep that transparency open. Yes.
Excellent. So let me ask you, how does your personal and professional experience align with the role of the ALA president?
First and foremost, I have done a lot of advocacy work as it relates to intellectual freedom. I started off in early 2015, 2016. I started doing work with the Office of Intellectual Freedom. I was one of their bloggers for their against censorship and against book banning. I did that work for several years. I was also chair of EMERT. EMERT is the Ethnic and Multicultural Information Exchange Roundtable of the American Library Association. I did 2 terms as the chair of EMERT. I also, I've done work with, I've built partnerships with organizations like Diverse Book Finder. The American Library Association has core values. And one of the core values, which of course in this socio-political climate, we have to make sure that we remain committed to this value, is the value of equity, diversity, and inclusion. A lot of the work that I have done, and even my research now is vested in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and making sure that library spaces, investigating how library spaces either perpetuate or mitigate diversity and equities. So we have to definitely make sure that we are continuing to uphold the core values that we have articulated for so long. And then I've also done work in terms of working with United Against Book Ban. United Against Book Ban, they launched recently the database of book resumes to give the librarians the language that they need to defend and the information that they need to defend against various types of book challenges. I was part of the group that was responsible for launching the book resumes. And again, just with the advocacy work that I've done, and again, going back to my own professional experience, haven't been a school librarian, haven't been in the trenches, knowing how difficult it is to build partnerships and collaboration with teachers, how difficult it is to build library collections that are meaningful, that support not only the mission of the school, but that align with the Library Bill of Rights, that also empower students to be to be information savvy and information literate. So I definitely understand this field from multiple vantage points, and I want to bring that to the role of president for the American Library Association. I also need to add, because the role of the ALA president is the role of the chief spokesperson for the organization. And I definitely think that I have been and I am a person who has not shied away from difficult conversations as it relates to intellectual freedom, as it relates to the need to support and to articulate the needs of so many different types of library workers, especially school librarians. I'm not afraid to have those conversations. I've had interviews with the Washington Post. I've done TED Talks about the work that I'm expressing now. And I definitely feel that I am equipped to really bring this conversation to a larger stage and a larger platform because I have been at the forefront of these conversations.
Friends, I'm so grateful that Dr. Jamison could join us for so many reasons, not the least of which I really am not interested in voting for anybody other than I'm usually not very forthcoming with my how I vote. I feel that we've had these conversations before, but voting is a very private matter. But in this case, friends, I've seen the candidates and I already made my choice. And the reason why we are showcasing Dr. Jamison on this episode today, the polls are going to open in March. So we still have some time. Dr. Jamison, would you give us an idea? If we always want to research, and librarians at our heart, we're always looking for more information, and you've made that available. We're going to put those links in the show notes, but please let listeners know where we can do some of this deep dive to learn more about you and what you stand for.
Absolutely. My website is www.andreajamison.com. That is one place that you can find out what my platform is. I'm also on social media. I'm active on Instagram and I'm also active on Blue Sky. I'm not as active on X, but you can find more information about me there. I've done a lot of writings because a lot of my research, I am really in the process right now. It's in press of publishing a study, an article for children in libraries. And it is on a study that I did where I looked at school collection development policies to see how those policies align with the Library Bill of Rights so that I can make recommendations on how we as librarians can continue to draft policies that is going to protect those values that we really hold dear, that we feel sort of guide our professional responsibilities. So you can find information about that coming shortly. But if you do a search on Google Scholar, I have a book that's out. I forget. I forgot to talk about my book. My book is Decentering Whiteness in Libraries through Inclusive Collection Development Practices. That book is an SLJ START reviewed book. So there's information out there about the book, and I've written extensively. I have articles in Knowledge Quest as well as articles in American Libraries Magazine, where I'm having these conversations about not only what it is that we need to do, and I think this is what kind of sets me apart because I've been doing the work, right? I feel compelled to do the work because the need is so great. But I think what sets me apart is I'm not only having conversations about what we need to do and why we need to do it. I'm also having conversations about this is how we can accomplish it. And I think the reason why I'm able to have these conversations is because of my background and because I've worked in so many different areas of librarianships, I can see the gaps. I can see the opportunities and I can see the gaps. I can see the opportunities to build relationships between school librarians and academic librarians. Because I'm thinking of this from the vantage point of the communities that we serve, right? We all have so much in common. And I think it is very common practice for librarians to kind of be within their own sort of microcosm, to work individually and exist. If you're a school librarian, you're existing as a school librarian. If you are a public librarian, you're existing as a public librarian. If you are an academic librarian, you're existing in that realm. We don't have a social climate right now that is going to allow us to do that. We have a social climate where we're going to have to pull our resources together. And we're going to have to tap into the skills and the expertise that we each have. And I can see those gaps and where those opportunities exist. And I have the vision, and I consider myself a visionary. Writer once wrote, great leaders don't set out to lead. They set out to make a change, to make a difference. And that's what is driving me to run for president. And I definitely think that I have the vision. And I definitely think that I have the roadmap and the plan to stay and the support. Thank you so much for your support, but the support of individuals to move from conversation into practice. And that's where I'm at.
Dr. Jamison, I am so grateful for your time, for your talent, for your energy, for your passion, and especially selfishly on behalf of school librarians who are hoping to have somebody in leadership who remembers that in addition to the many librarians that you represent, that the school librarians are also part of this organization. Friends, we're going to be putting a lot of resources in the show notes. Importantly, let's remember that you need to be a member of ALA in good standing by the end of January in order to vote. The polls open March 10th through April 2nd of this year. And so, friends, I'm hoping that you exercise your civic responsibility and cast your ballot for Dr. Jamison. And, Dr. Jamison, I hope 2025 is a wonderful year for you. Thank you for the work that you do with your students, for the advocacy that you bring, and honestly, truly, what you've been able to do in terms of making actual change in our profession, both, for school librarians, but also for our profession writ large. I appreciate you, and I wish you the very best in this 2025.
Can I just share really quickly that even if you're currently not a member of ALA, you can still support me and you can still endorse the campaign if you believe in this mission and this work, and standing in solidarity for school librarians. On my website, I do have a link that I'm going to share to a Padlet where you can post your endorsement for school librarians. And you can also share with librarians that you do know who are voting members of ALA and to get the message out that we definitely need to stand in solidarity for school librarians, because there are librarians within the profession that can do a lot of the heavy lifting, so that our newer librarians and the librarians who are working with administrators who just do not get it, they can feel supported, they can be heard, and that we can strengthen this organization together.
Dr. Jamison, I wish you the very best this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. Be sure to visit Learnix at www.learnics.com to learn more and to schedule a demo. If you mention that you heard about Learnix on School Librarians United podcast, you'll receive 20% off your subscription. The topic of our next episode will be Middle School Library Essentials and my conversation with Katie Capshaw. I hope you will tune in.